Hi, and welcome to Hack Your Career. I'm Keith Wilson, Director of Cybersecurity Education for AttackIQ. This live stream, we're trying to introduce you to all sorts of careers in cybersecurity and the stories of the people behind those careers. Today's guest is a coworker and a friend, and you may recognize him from his AttackIQ Academy course, Extending Attack with Attack Workbench. He also has a new course coming out next month on using Attack to mitigate ransomware. He's currently a senior cyber threat consultant for AttackIQ. Please welcome Andrew Costis, or as we call him, AC. AC, welcome to Hack Your Career. How's it going?
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, awesome to be here. So I was just jamming to the cool retro music just while we were waiting there. So, but yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I love that music, and it's funny because I think we were playing the same sort of wait music for our for when we were doing Academy Live, right? And we had a lot of people that are like, "Man, I love this video game music," and it's the same thing here too. I don't think our guests get the view of it, but our producers get the view behind the scenes of me kind of sitting in the chair just dancing to the music every time. It's weird because you wouldn't think it's a song you can memorize, but I certainly have that intro song memorized now. So, AC, normally I start these interviews by asking about someone's first cybersecurity job. But for you, I'd like to talk about what you're currently doing as a cyber threat consultant for AttackIQ. So, can you tell me and our listeners or our viewers, what does the day-to-day work look like for you as a cyber threat consultant?
Yes, sure. So essentially, I'm allocated full time to one of our larger customers. They have a global presence in the healthcare industry, and so I'm very much kind of taking the reins really for everything to do with their deployment, the implementation, and just basically making them a success using the Attack IQ platform. And so day to day can vary greatly from kind of configuration, help related questions to advising on things to do with MITRE ATT&CK framework, the latest threats, threat of the day, new families of ransomware, as well as liaising with their red team, more recently their fusion team or purple team, as well as their CTI team and so on. So very, very interesting. Kind of outside of that, kind of doing these kind of ad hoc things on the side for yourself and our co-workers.
Sure, and we love that you teach these classes for us too. I know our students are appreciative of all the classes they put out. You've been a great instructor for us. I don't want to get too far off topic, but since we are talking about it, why don't you can you tell us a little bit, just a little hint about the class that you're getting ready to put out? What is it about?
Yeah, so it's titled Countering Ransomware with MITRE ATT&CK. And it's really just kind of well, I hope it's going to be a really good kind of overview in terms of some of the ways and the methodologies that you can use and implement in your own organization, big or small, to start kind of giving a bit more kind of laser focus on some of the ways that you can, circumvent and protect yourself against ransomware, really. So I've tried to introduce some of the kind of key ideas that are often discussed, for my day-to-day job, but also kind of in the larger industry perspective as well. So hopefully there's some good content in there, and it's very applicable to everyone. So whether you're technical, whether you're a project manager, whether you're a thought leader, there is no audience that it doesn't necessarily apply to. So I'm kind of hoping that everyone will take something away from it.
Yeah, I mean, ransomware is on the top of everyone's mind. It's one of the, it's one of those keywords that's going to pop up in any security conversation. The word ransomware is eventually going to come up. Now, before you were a cyber threat consultant for AttackIQ, you had previous roles in threat research. Now, I'm wondering, did those threat research roles, did they have any influence? Did they help at all with the role that you do today?
Absolutely, yeah. So out of the 20 plus years in this space, I guess I've been probably doing threat research slash malware analysis for the previous 5 years. So I've been at AttackIQ for 1 year as of last week. But yeah, for sure. So in answer to your question,
Congratulations for the year anniversary.
yeah, right. And literally on the day that I just returned from PTO, so that was good timing. But yeah, so that 5 years of doing malware and threat research and tracking, APTs and crimeware and so on, that really kind of comes into play in my kind of day-to-day role here at AttackIQ, because it helps to have that understanding to be able to deconstruct malware and other types of threats, be able to kind of build that into our platform using attack flows or attack graphs in the platform. So yeah, lots of kind of really valuable experience that I've gained, in previous roles that are still very much kind of relevant to my role here.
So let's speaking of previous roles, let's back up even further than the threat research. And so it looks like you had a background in data storage and backup before you started working. Before you started to work in something more security focused. Now, I would argue there's security kind of built into backup, right? Backups are part of security, and there's going to be some of that in data storage as well. So I'm wondering, were there nuggets like that you picked up in there that you were able to shift to security? Was there anything in particular from that background?
It's funny because when I first started out, I kind of wore many hats, as we still kind of do today, really. But I kind of started off from the very bottom, doing kind of hardware break fix, kind of moving up to sysadmin, network admin, Active Directory, and then it kind of eventually fell into kind of disaster recovery, mainly through kind of technical support. So yeah, it's kind of eye-opening. But at the time, it was just kind of really just one of many aspects to IT, right? But whereas now, disaster recovery in itself is so critical to, ransomware recovery, as well as preparation for ransomware, making sure you have backups off-site, making sure that you are testing and validating your backups, on a regular cadence, which is, stuff like this we used to tell our customers all the time, but you didn't really necessarily tell it to them in a security context. So it's kind of funny how, things come back round in a full circle, and now backups are probably more important than ever before.
Now we've got a question in from one of our viewers, and I want to put this out there too. If you're watching this live on LinkedIn right now, or wherever we're streaming this, I believe it's just LinkedIn, but I could be wrong. Put in the comments if you have any questions at all. Please feel free. If you've got questions for myself, if you've got questions for AC, please put them in the comments. We'll try and get them answered. And we do have one question. We're going to answer these throughout as we talk about AC's career and what he's done so far. But there could be some technical questions that pop up. So the one that we've got right now is, what are your opinions regarding malware on the cloud or in the cloud? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, firstly, thanks for the question, and it's a really interesting question. So everyone's going to have a different spin on this, but from the trenches, from my previous 5 years doing malware, we personally, the teams that I was working on previously, we personally didn't see a huge flurry of malware targeting cloud infrastructure specifically. However, it certainly has been a noticeable increase. I'd say a gradual increase in the last couple of years. I've got some very good friends working at other cloud security startups, and they're certainly seeing a gradual rise. But like all of us, right? So we're all kind of still getting to grips with all the various cloud providers, and I'm sure as too are the adversaries. So I don't think we've got anything to panic about just yet, but definitely need to be kind of ramping up our own skills and defenses, because I'm fairly confident that as everything, as we know, is moving to the cloud, I'm sure the adversaries are only going to kind of increase, looking at cloud targets as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a huge shift to the cloud. And you bring up a good point too, is, adversaries, we discuss them like there's some sort of deity, right? Like some new technology comes out and they are already graced with the knowledge of how to exploit it. Like that, that's kind of this pedestal that we put them up on. And I think it's kind of a false assumption, right? They're human just like us. They just do the opposite of what we're playing the defense side. They're playing the attack side. We're both learning the technologies at the same time. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I haven't seen too much of it recently. I've been pulled back in my role and really more focused on education and management than I have been in the security realm, but I still pay attention to security. And I haven't seen too much about malware in the cloud. You said you've seen some of it, but I think you're right. It's definitely going to be an evolving thing that, as with most things we see in technology, is going to have kind of look like a hockey stick, right? If we look at the graph of how quickly we see things take off. So before we were answering that, we were talking about backup, data storage, data recovery. That was what you were doing before you got into security. Was there a particular thing that made you decide to make that shift into security? Was it just like, oh, this is a cool thing I want to try, or did an opportunity come your way? How did that work?
Well, I would actually go back further than that just to kind of set the scene. So when I was in college, I actually, full disclosure, I never actually finished my college course because I got bored with it. So I kind of enjoyed playing around with Trojans in college and kind of ejecting CD-ROM trays of target machines. And of course, back then it was all kind of in good faith, and there was no harm done. But yeah, so I kind of fell into. I just wanted to go out into the workplace and earn money, and I didn't necessarily have like a specific goal in mind. But it wasn't until I had a few years under my belt, I ended up working at Symantec. And, this was around the time where, I guess I first started to notice some of the threat research blog posts and white papers.
Symantec, for those that don't know, Symantec isn't purely just security, especially at the time. They also had a backup and storage solution.
Absolutely.
And is that how you came in, was through the backup and storage side of it?
No, not really. So okay. I joined Symantec on the DR side with the intention of joining the security side. But anyway, long story short, I became very proficient at technical support. And when you're doing enterprise technical support, which is great experience, by the way, you get so used to, you get really good exposure to dealing with really complex environments, complex infrastructure and stuff like that. So eventually, I eventually joined a company, a SIM provider called Logarithm, and I was still doing technical support there. But again, I was kind of getting a little bit closer each time to kind of doing more of a full-time job role. And eventually a threat research position came about, and the rest is history. So yeah, lots of persistence and, just kind of moving around until eventually the right role came up.
So what was easy about making that change? I want you to think about something that was kind of easy when you made that change. What was just very natural, right? And then also think about something that was harder to make click, right? What you said you'd kind of said, oh well, I was doing these support roles, and then I got this threat researcher role. What was it that stopped you from just getting? Why couldn't you just walk in and get a threat researcher role? I think that's what I'm trying to ask.
Okay, so when I joined Logarithm, we were kind of similar size to AttackIQ at the time. So we had a very limited number of threat researchers in our US office. So it was just more of a case of just waiting for a role to be created in the UK, which did eventually happen. But yeah, I mean, what was easy was just being able to kind of apply myself to something that I'd felt so passionate about for many, many years prior. But one of the things I remember at the time, one of the major challenges that I had was when you work in a kind of technical support environment, your work is very structured and it's very, what to expect. And then suddenly when you go into a research position, your work and your day is very unstructured and you're not having anyone telling you what you need to do. It's kind of working from a conveyor belt perspective to a more project base was for me quite difficult, to be honest. It takes some practice.
It's interesting that you shared that, because I had the same thing, and I've never really heard anybody else bring it before. One of my first jobs was in support. I worked in support for internet security systems. And you're right, it's incredibly structured. Ticket comes in, you respond to ticket, you fix problem, or you keep responding to ticket until problem's fixed, you close ticket. You open next ticket and resume. Like, that's what it is. You learn a lot. You learn a lot about troubleshooting. I'm oversimplifying it, but there is a very, very much a structured part of that. And then I think ever since I left that part of my career, I've been craving to get back to it because it was so much easier than people just going, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do right now. I'm just going to say, I need you to do this thing by the end of the quarter.
Honestly, and you know what? Like, up until I'd done threat research full time, I'd never really heard of the term imposter syndrome. It wasn't even something that ever crossed my mind. And then all of a sudden, when you're kind of, you're out on your own in the void, and you feel like you have a lot to prove now because you're working with some very smart people, not just in your own company, but in your, across the industry. You suddenly start putting a lot of pressure against yourself, a different type of pressure to, having an angry customer on the phone because, product's been down for a couple of days and it's your fault and you're assigned to that ticket, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's external pressure, and that you can get away from, right? Like, somebody's yelling at me on the phone, I can hang up the phone. But if I got this internal pressure telling me you're not good enough, everybody else here is smarter than you, I can't just hang up on myself. Like, that's still with me. The only thing I can do is what turns into bad habits, which I'm sure you've experienced, and I'm sure plenty of our viewers have experienced, right? Bad habits of overwork and staying up late to try and compensate. And it leads to burnout. And I'm glad you bring that up, because I see imposter syndrome pop up more and more and more, particularly in the cybersecurity industry. And I don't think it's exclusive to cybersecurity. I just happen to have a focus on it. So it's always interesting to hear. And I'd even venture to guess that every guest that we've had on here will tell me that they've experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their career. So what did you do to cope with that? How did you cope with imposter syndrome? Or did you not? Do you still deal with it?
I kind of explored many avenues and tried different approaches, but I think ultimately, I guess how I kind of resolved it was just to kind of reach an acceptance stage that, this is the way. You're only as good as this is just my opinion, right? But you're only as good as your last 6 to 12 months in this industry. So what you learned 2 years ago, you're not going to remember. You're very unlikely to remember because, everything is just a fire hose of new information coming out all the time. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of reached a point where I'm okay with that now. I'm not trying to be expert at IDS or firewalls or SIEM or this, that, and the other, like, because it's impossible. So, even with malware, I was working with some awesome, smart people, that had been doing malware for, 15, 20 years, right? It takes a long time to reach that kind of level of proficiency and a lot of patience as well. But, ultimately, everyone has to just kind of focus on their own journey and not get too hung up about how other people are performing or, how you compare to other people in the room, because it's your journey, and just enjoy the ride.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. And now I want to shift, because we've hit it so many times, right? Most of your security career has been focused on being a threat researcher. That sounds like a pretty cool title. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Like, what are some of the day-to-day tasks of a threat researcher?
Yeah. So, I'll give you an example. So I joined Carbon Black, who have since been acquired by VMware. But I think at the time we had, thousands of customers, millions of endpoints. And, obviously ransomware has been, a massively growing trend in the last 5 years or so. And so I worked on a team of 4 specialists, primarily focused on ransomware, as well as kind of banking Trojans. But obviously ransomware was the bigger, more pressing topic. So, how a typical day would be, some kind of either some intel would come in, maybe we'd get a customer that would be hit by some ransomware, and then we'd kind of partly do some incident response, but more importantly, go off and kind of deconstruct the ransomware sample in order to understand all of the TTPs, and then ultimately to write the detection logic that would then go back into the Carbon Black products. So that's kind of a typical day. And then you'd kind of do longer term research as well, where you'd be kind of taking out kind of fingerprints of those, of that particular ransomware family. You'd maybe be kind of tracking it on VirusTotal and other places, and then seeing if that particular ransomware family evolves, and if so, how, and what the differences might be, and so on.
So if you had to nail down, a type of education or skills that are a set of skills that are needed for that job, let's just pick like top 3 skills. If you said these are the 3 skills that I have or had or developed at the time that made me good at this job, what would they be?
Definitely, you have to be passionate about it, because, some malware samples you could be staring at for weeks and weeks and weeks. And when you're looking at assembly code and trying to find patterns and trying to find, that needle in a haystack, it can be at times quite draining. So you have to be passionate about it. So you have to have that kind of enthusiasm. As glamorous as it sounds, it can be really hard and stressful at times, although at the same time very rewarding as well, but it can be very draining. So yeah, I think passion, technically, obviously you need to have like some kind of computer science background. Now, as I said, I never finished college. I don't have any formal degree, but that never stopped me from doing what I would consider one of the harder areas of cybersecurity,
Sure.
in terms of reverse engineering. So but I would say for sure, like, any kind of computer science background would help, whether that's with a degree or without. And third one, I would say just generally be a good communicator and a team player, because, ultimately, there's always a larger question to answer. So while you might be one small cog in the wheel, ultimately you may need to be reporting your findings back to a larger team. They might need to be reporting their findings back to a large customer or thousands of large customers. So, it's very much a team sport. So having good communication and being a good team player are really critical, in my opinion.
So you didn't have the college degree, but you had to learn about this somewhere. How'd you learn about it? What did you do to learn? Do you have any resources that you can share with somebody looking to be a threat researcher?
I mean, in terms of computer science, loads of free resources. So CS50 is a great resource, part of the MIT free free computer science course. Lots of free resources out there in terms of general computer science. In terms of malware, even when I started learning it, there wasn't really many books on it. Now there's more books, there's more YouTube videos than ever before. There's live streamers now that will go and deconstruct malware. And it wasn't that many years ago that I got into it, and hardly any of that was available. But I mean, in answer to your question, essentially just self-taught. I really wanted to learn it. I was really curious. I wanted to understand what goes on inside memory, what happens at the processor level, how does this malware do bad stuff. And if you're passionate about something, then no matter how hard the topic or the subject would be, you just keep pushing on. And that's kind of what I did.
Now, do you have a recommendation for how people could practice that? Say I wanted to be a threat researcher, right? And I'm trying to get a job as a threat researcher, and I don't have experience, but I want to prove to a company that I can do this, right? Any thoughts on how I can practice? Any sort of resources I can go to and grab a piece of malware, write up a report? What are your recommendations?
Yeah, honestly, like, there's so many people online now that have, their kind of their work persona and then their kind of personal persona. And it's kind of that, that whole kind of personal branding. But, basically get your hands on some malware, have access to, a virtual environment where you can safely install tools into the machine, detonate the malware safely, and just start learning and start documenting things that you do, whether it's in a blog post or on a GitHub page. It doesn't really matter, but just it's an iterative process. So, for every malware sample you come across, there's going to be some similarities, but mostly differences. So just keep iterating through it, get good at, documentation, because there'll be lots of that, and understand the bigger picture. Malware analysis is kind of a means to an end. So it's a really important skill. But as I say, you know, there's other elements to malware analysis that, you know, play a really crucial role in protecting companies out there. You know, for example, you know, writing detection rules, whether they plug into your SIEM, your next-gen antivirus product, or whatever that may be. You know, in our case, AttackIQ, we have attack flows, and using that kind of, you know, reverse engineering process with our own threat researchers, you know, we're able to build out these custom attack flows or attack graphs that, you know, effectively emulate a malware sample very, very closely.
Yeah. Let's go to, I'm going to pick a viewer question here. And it's not necessarily related to your career. It's more related to your expertise, because we have talked about it so much. So what is the best solution to protect? And best is going to be subjective, right? What do you think in terms of a solution to protect backups against ransomware?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, I was recently reading up about Microsoft Azure in the cloud. So they kind of offer kind of I think it was a 30-day snapshot backup as like a kind of an extra safety mechanism. But, you know, realistically speaking, the same thing applies. So having your backup in multiple locations, you know, having access to those backups. I don't necessarily know about the best solution. And, you know, full disclosure, I was working in backup and DR, you know, probably circa 15 years ago. So I'm sure a lot's changed since then. But you know, kind of the basics still apply. So, you know, rather than just having a single point of failure and having all your backups stored on site, right? You know, have them in different, you know, locations. You know, years ago when I was dealing with it, we were dealing with these gigantic robotic tape libraries that would, you know, rotate the tapes in these massive data centers, and now everything's just backed up to disk and NAS storage and so on. So, you know, very, very different to, you know, from when I was doing it. But
yeah, technology, specifically security technology, just everything evolves so quickly. In over 15 years, it's going to be quite the change. So I want to spend, before we wrap up, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking to you, because it's something I always, you know, this kind of started back with an interview that we did with Neil Bridges, where he was talking to me about cycles that he has in his career, where he'll go work, be a practitioner of cybersecurity for multiple years, then he'll go teach for a year or two, then he'll go back and be a practitioner again, and go teach for a year or two. So not everybody needs to be that formal in it, but you've been given the opportunity to create classes for AttackIQ Academy and teach. And I always advocate to this for people who have gotten to that point in their career where they go, even if you're still fairly new to cybersecurity, like, you can still be an expert on something, right? And I always recommend to people that you take whatever it is that you're trying to be an expert on and teach it to somebody else. Have you found personally for you that benefit is held up, right? You've done one course for Academy, you're getting ready to do a second course, and I'm sure you teach sort of informally on a regular basis with your coworkers, with customers, things like that. So I want to get your thoughts on how that's affected your knowledge or your career, even if it's had an impact on your career.
yeah, I mean, going back in time to kind of, I guess, when I first started out doing threat research, you know, one of the aspects that I'd never actually considered was doing the public facing, you know, this kind of work, right? So speaking at in-person events, as well as webinars, and you know, and it was something that I'd never really considered, but I kind of forced myself through the pain of public speaking, and you know, just learning to just keep force myself to take up those opportunities, and it does pay off. You know, yeah, I've gained a lot of skills. I'm still learning how to, you know, present, and you know, how to do PowerPoint properly, but you know, these are kind of you know, little things really, but ultimately, when I look back, and you know, just in the last, you know, few years, I look at some of the conferences I've spoke at, or some of the webinars that I've been able to present at, and it soon adds up and it soon builds up. So for sure, you know, you know, there's always plenty to gain, and nothing lost by you know, not only taking up the opportunities, but you know, going off and having to research a topic, even if you're new to the scene. chances are no one else is really looking at it, or maybe they did, but they did 5 years ago, right? And as we know, things, rapidly move at a very fast pace in our industry. So,
well, and something else I'd recommend too, if you're worried about teaching something that somebody has already taught, first of all, it doesn't matter. You're not doing it for notoriety. You're doing it for yourself. But second of all, just because somebody explained it one way doesn't mean you can't explain it better. I mean, there's only so much to teach, right? The OSI model is the same, whether I teach it, whether you go to a university that teaches it, whether you're in, you learn it from some YouTuber. The OSI model is going to be the same no matter what. How it's taught to you can be different through each person. So just remember, if you know something, you can always put your spin on teaching it to somebody else. AC, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much for being an instructor for AttackIQ Academy. I want to remind all of our listeners or viewers that we offer free training on academy.attackiq.com. That's free cybersecurity training. We offer CPE credits, digital badges when you pass the courses, all that good stuff. Go there to check out AC's existing class, Extending Attack with Attack Workbench, and his newest course coming out on using MITRE ATT&CK for ransomware very soon. Also, one more thing, we're going to put the link in here too, because you've only got 2 more days before it's happening. Well, it's the rest of today and tomorrow. April 21st, 2022 is our 2nd annual Purple Hats Conference. To sign up or register, check down in the comments. We'll put a link in there for purplehats.org. Please, if you're looking for more free educational material, ton of great talks happening there. It's free. Did I mention it's free along with AttackIQ Academy? AC, thank you so much again for being on the show. Everybody else, thank you for being here with Hack Your Career, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Have a great one.